What's up everyone, Master Fox here today, talking about Monarchs and the ban list. I strongly believe that Monarchs are going to get hit very hard by this ban list in the TCG, and it's not just because the OCG hit them, but rather this is something that I find inherent to how the TCG deals with the game. Monarchs simply are not conducive to business and to fostering the type of edgy competitive environment that Konami seems to want in the TCG. Monarchs just spit in the face of so many things that I can't see Konami letting them free very long at the top again. So there's a couple of reasons for this, and I'll start to outline them. The first reason is Monarchs are very old school. They're not really a sexy deck. What do I mean by this? Well, they aren't using the shiny new toys, namely the pendulums. In fact, they're pretty much the antithesis to them, but I'll expand on that a bit more later. Back to them being one of the oldest meta decks. Sure, 90% of the deck doesn't really bear any resemblance to the Monarch decks of old, way back in 2006 and back beyond, but they do harken to the past and call forth a different type of player. One probably more attached to their deck, attached to the past, and less likely to let it go. A player less likely to move on to new products so easily, and who would rather play with one deck as long as they can possibly play with it. A player like, well, me. Monarchs are definitely bad for Konami, as they're a deck that can potentially have a lot of longevity if they're not hit by the ban list. Now for the second reason. Monarchs are dirt cheap. That's right. You can buy 3 structure decks and basically compete with the most expensive decks in the game right now. Scratch that. You aren't just able to go toe-to-toe with them, but you can actually downright stomp even decks like Cosmos and Draco Pals. For a $30 deck, basically, that's insane. You have so much bang for your buck right there. Great for the customer, but for business? Not really. If Monarchs continue to be strong and cheap, players will basically ignore future booster sets and instead just buy up structures, and once they have them, they can play with them for as long as they like, which nets less profit for Konami. Another strike in the coffin for Monarchs. Budget meta decks never really last long. It's a pure business decision, plain and simple. You have to hit decks that are good, and if they're not expensive, people aren't going to be buying booster packs, and booster packs is basically the crux of how you make all of your money. Structure decks do make some money, but I assume the profit margin on booster sets is much higher just because of the inherent random nature. People know what they're getting when you buy a structure deck, but when you buy booster sets, the cards come in it at random, so you're not guaranteed to pull what you want, so you have to buy more in order to get what you want. Moving on to reason number 3. Monarchs are very oppressive to pendulums, and pendulums are the new thing in the game. Konami has continuously tried to push them until finally we got Pepe, but the TCG realized that they may have gone too far and then released the emergency ban list. Following that, we have Monarchs who downright say no to the extra deck shenanigans of all different decks, but this in particular strikes a critical weakness of the Draco Pal deck and other pendulum-based decks. Cutting off the lifeblood of the extra deck will not be good to deal with in the long run, because it's unlikely Konami will continually make decks that aren't reliant on the extra deck, as we have now a couple decks that are really good that don't rely on the extra deck. As I mentioned earlier, since its inception, the extra deck has always been a sort of sexy thing. It's always been in and hip and cool, and it's always been what the game was kind of centralized around, at least since around the Synchro era. Tribute summoning has not been that kind of sexy new commodity, and having tribute summoning being able to stamp out extra deck just won't be viable for a long time in terms of business strategy. Moving on to the last reason, this is somewhat subjective, but Monarchs are just not too fun to play against. I play Monarchs and I play a lot against Monarchs as well, and of all the decks in the meta right now, I think this is the least fun deck to play against, and in the mirror it's even less fun for me. It's a very predictable deck, but also very powerful, and it's simply like a behemoth that sometimes you just can't overpower, which can be frustrating to face. In this way, it's very reminiscent of Clifford as a deck for me. While I had originally wondered why Cleese were hit so hard the first time around, but now I realize that the deck, besides being very oppressive, was just not a very fun deck to play against, and I believe it was for this reason that Konami decided to just kill him off first. Because if you guys remember, in the first ban list, Cleese got hit the hardest of all of the Duelist Alliance era decks. I know Cleveforts didn't come out in Duelist Alliance, but it was in that era of the top 5 or so decks, but they got hit the hardest in the first ban list that came immediately after. So for these reasons, I don't see Monarchs as a deck that's very favorable to Konami, especially for them to allow it to exist for a long time. The fact that it's cheap and easy to play means that as long as it remains good, a large chunk of players can just hang on to their $30 or so deck and continue to face off against even Konami's shiniest new toys. Monarchs would be a thorn in the side of business, and as a result, I believe they're going to be hit very, very hard in this upcoming ban list. So that's pretty much just my opinions on Monarchs and the ban list. Tell me what you guys think in the comment section below. What do you guys think about it? Give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in my next video. Thank you.